Going on, everyone. So the Lakers acquiring Christian Wood means one thing. They got a very good offensive player. They got a guy that's a legit 17-8 guy, give you almost 2 assists per game, shoots 51.5% from the field, a guy that can basically score at all 3 levels. He's a great pick and pop player, great pick and roll player. Like, you can do pretty much anything with him on the offensive end. That's where his strengths are. One of the big question marks and the big concerns that many people pointed out, though, is that he's not a good defensive player. And you're seeing a lot of just conversation about his poor defense, but aren't really taking many factors into account. And the lack of defense is actually greatly overblown. Now, he's not Anthony Davis level defensively. He's not some like elite level defensive guy, but he's not bad at all. So just on the surface, right? Like if you were just to look up his stats as far as like blocks go, right? He gave you 1.1 blocks last year, gave you about half a steal. This is a guy who for his career is basically 1 block and half a steal per game. Surface, not great, but not bad, right? It's not great considering he's a guy that plays around 25 minutes a game. But if you look up his per 40 minutes, he's about 3.2 to 3.6 blocks per game. That is really good. That puts him in like the 25th percent over the entire league in that regard, which again, isn't like elite. It's not Giannis. It's not Anthony Davis level, but it's still very good. He is excellent in that regard. But his defensive rating, this is a guy that for his career is basically a 112 defensive rated player. Now, league average is around 115. Last year, we'll go off of last year because last year is when people thought, oh, Christian Wood was terrible defensively. The one thing Dallas needed was defense, and Christian Wood couldn't even get on the court because he was so bad defensively. He actually wasn't. In 26 minutes per game, he was a 113.4, which, again, is good. That's better than league average. It's not great, right? And the problems that Christian Wood had with the Dallas Mavericks was far more than just his talent on both sides of the ball. Not just that, but Christian Wood isn't your one line of defense, right? Like, he's not Anthony Davis, where Anthony Davis can completely shut down a opposing team's offense essentially by himself. Like, the Lakers went from like 28th defensively when Anthony Davis was off the court. This was before the Vanderbilt trade and all that stuff. But we're like 28th or 26th defensively when Anthony Davis was off the court to like top 10 when AD was on the court with like a roster full of 6-foot guys. That's how good Anthony Davis is. Anthony Davis is literally the best defensive player in the league by every metric. Christian Wood is not good in that role. If you're putting Christian Wood out there to be the primary defensive guy to basically shut down an entire offense, then yeah, it's not going to work. But Dallas didn't have a bunch of sizable wings that could defend multiple positions. They didn't have an Anthony Davis that could be alongside of a Christian Wood and be a great help defender and be a great shot blocker, and then a Jared Vanderbilt on the other side. I mean, you put Christian Wood in that role, all of a sudden this dude could be great defensively. He's good defensively. He's very good defensively. He's not great elite level defense. He's not Jared Vanderbilt. He's not Anthony Davis, but he is good enough with the right schemes. He's had some very good defensive seasons, right? He had that one stint with Charlotte where he had a defensive rating of 106, right? If you inflate it, because he only played about 8 minutes per game, he would have been around about a 109 to 110, which is what he was in Detroit when he was getting 21.4. And Detroit's season is the season that I always mention of like a good comparison, a good template for Christian Wood actually playing good defense. He had that one season in Detroit where he played 62 games, and he was actually very good defensively for them, given the circumstances. And he was like a plus 68 or plus 68 for the Detroit Pistons that year. Again, he's not a great front number one defensive option. He also has some areas that are bad, but I do believe will be fixed rather quickly with this Lakers roster because you have Anthony Davis, who is, again, the best defense player in the league and also happens to be a big man. And you have a defensive-minded coach in Darvin Ham. So the bad areas are pick and roll defense. He was in the 36th percentile, which is not good. He just isn't active in the pick and roll. He doesn't press up. He doesn't use his hands and his length the way he does when he's out on the perimeter, which we'll talk about here shortly. So if he can get active in that pick and roll and learn to position himself better, he can actually be very impactful because he's very good in isolation plays, and he's actually one of the best defensive big men in switching and having to defend in isolations, which, again, we'll cover in a second. But you have a guy in Anthony Davis who is an excellent pick and roll big man, and you know who else is actually a very good pick and roll big man? Jackson Hayes. So Christian Wood is going to have two very good pick and roll big men to learn from and play off of, defensive big men. And then you're going to have a guy in Darvin Ham who is going to instill defense and explain to him and work with him on how to effectively defend that pick and roll. The other major issue, and this one may not be able to be as fixed just because this is the lack of strength. So he has a very hard time defending like the stronger players, which is why I've talked about how I really think Christian Wood needs to have or the Lakers need to get somebody that is a more sizable, because you can't put Christian Wood on a Jokic or an Embiid. He's also not good against like the bigger perimeter guys, right? The guys that can just kind of put their shoulders down and like power through him. Like you don't want to put Christian Wood on like a Zion because he's just going to get absolutely abused. He has a hard time just because of his lack of strength getting and keeping those bulkier, sizable players out of the way, right? Like guys like LeBron who can just put their shoulder down and just pile through him and finish at the rim, he has a hard time with. But he's very good against like guards and twitchier players, right? So as far as being a great like switch defender, he held players in isolation plays to 36% shooting, which is excellent. Absolutely excellent. He's really good at keeping his space, keeping his distance. He's very good at moving his feet, and he's got the lateral quickness, kind of like a Jared Vanderbilt. And he's able to use his 7'3" wingspan to get out and block shots. That's also how he kind of defends in the interior. Kind of just allows the offensive player to approach and then kind of uses his wingspan to kind of judge, engage, and block the shot. So that is where he's going to thrive. He's a guy that if he gets switched out to, an Andrew Wiggins or something like that, he's going to be able to stay in front of him and actually properly defend him and block shots. So he's a guy that doesn't have to just camp in the paint and be there as a shot blocker. He's a guy that can absolutely step out, and you'd have Anthony Davis playing in the free safety role, ready to block shots. So not only would you have two big men in Anthony Davis and Christian Wood that could step out and defend the perimeter if they're sharing the court together, you also have two big men that can hang back and be that help defender and be able to block shots. He's also good at being a blindside defender and a help defender if you funnel the offensive player to him. So, for example, let's say Jared Vanderbilt is guarding Steph Curry. Jared Vanderbilt can funnel Steph Curry into Christian Wood, and Christian Wood is great at being that help defender and being that deterrent at the rim. If you just put him on an island, he doesn't have the strength to kind of match up with some of these bigger guys, but he does against the smaller guys and can block those shots, which is good. So he's a good blindside defender. He's a very good help defender. He knows how to use his length in a proper manner. And he's a guy that can defend and switch out on the perimeter. The two major flaws in his defensive game, one I think will be fixed, and that is, again, the pick and roll defense. The other one I don't think can be fixed, at least this year, because he would have to be stronger. But if he can do that, Christian Wood is going to be a good defensive player for the Lakers. It's also a lot about his commitment and buy-in, right? If Christian Wood is committed to the defensive end and really buys in on being a good defensive player on that side, then he's going to have that impact, right? It's up to him whether he wants to have that success or not, because he's in such a great position. And he has the best guy in the league who has his back, and Anthony Davis. So he's going to be able to trust that Anthony Davis is there as a help defender. And he's going to be on a roster full of guys that can defend multiple positions. So he's not going to get put in many island plays where he's going to have to figure it out on the fly. Right? And most of the time, he's going to be that help defender, or be that blindside help defender, or be that other deterrent at the rim rather than the main deterrent at the rim. Right? Like, you look at Dallas, it's like they didn't have any real point of attack. Their only defender was Dorian Finney-Smith. And it's like, okay, like, so you have one guy, everyone else, like Luka's getting walked by, like everyone's getting blown by, and then you want Christian Wood to stand there and basically have to be the sole defensive player? No, that's not his strengths. Darvin Ham is going to put Christian Wood in a position to be strong on the defensive end. It just comes down to Christian Wood's commitment. So this whole narrative that Christian Wood is this terrible defensive player and all that, it's a silly narrative. It's something that I've talked about. I've talked about how he's not that bad. Again, he's not great. He's not that good to where, again, he can be the primary impact player on the defensive end. He's not that guy, but he's a very good complementary defender that's going to be in a very good defensive scheme, that's going to be surrounded by a bunch of very good defensive players, and he's going to have success on the defensive end, right? So expect him to actually be pretty good defensively this year. Again, not saying, don't expect him to be elite. Don't expect him to be Giannis or Anthony Davis or anything like that, right? Like, he's going to be good enough for what the Lakers need in the spots that they need him to be in. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. How do you feel about Christian Wood and his defense? Do you think and agree that, yeah, it's a little overblown? What did you think of this news? Were you aware of this information? Were you not? How do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments.